It was supposed to be a quick detour. That's what Daniel kept telling himself as the GPS redirected him off the highway and onto a narrow, winding road that cut through miles of dark pine forest. The blue line on the screen promised he'd save 20 minutes, maybe more if traffic built up behind him. He didn't question it, not at first. The road felt wrong almost immediately. There were no reflectors, no painted lines, just cracked asphalt and trees pressing in from both sides like they were trying to swallow the road whole. His headlights stretched forward, cutting a thin tunnel through the darkness. The branches overhead formed an arch, and every now and then something moved inside them. A twitch, a ripple. Each time he looked directly, there was nothing. He turned down the radio. He didn't remember doing that. But suddenly the car was silent except for the low hum of the engine and the soft mechanical voice of the GPS. In 2 miles, arrive at destination. Daniel frowned. Destination. He hadn't typed anything. The screen showed a name. Hollow Creek. The map zoomed in and out, recalculating. The road twisted in a tight loop before straightening again, as if the system couldn't quite decide where he was. He reached to cancel the route, but the screen froze. He tapped it again. Nothing. Then the signal bars disappeared. No service. The voice repeated, exactly the same as before. In 2 miles, arrive at destination. He drove faster. The trees ended without warning. The town appeared all at once. It was small, maybe 10 buildings total. A gas station, a diner, a church with a crooked steeple, and rows of houses that looked too similar to each other. Every porch light was on. Every window glowed with warm, yellow light. But the streets were empty. No cars, no people, no movement. The silence pressed against his ears until he could hear his own pulse. The GPS said, "You have arrived." He stopped in front of the gas station. For a long moment, he stayed in the car. The lights inside flickered. The sign above the door buzzed, the sound uneven and tired. He realized he hadn't seen a single street sign. No welcome sign. No town name. Just the buildings. Waiting. He opened the door. The bell rang. The smell hit him first. Old coffee. Dust. Something metallic. Behind the counter stood a woman. She looked normal, like middle-aged. Hair pulled into a tight bun, but her eyes were too wide, like she'd been surprised a long time ago and never recovered. "You're early," she said. Daniel blinked. For what? The morning. He gave a nervous laugh. "I'm just passing through. Do you know how to get back to Highway 17? The woman didn't answer. Instead, she stared past him, out the window. Daniel turned. The sky was completely black. No stars, no moon, no clouds. Just an empty, endless dark. "What time is it?" he asked. She smiled. "We don't have mornings here." Something in her tone made his stomach twist. "That's not funny." She slid a cup of coffee toward him, He hadn't seen her pour it. You should drink. It helps. Helps with what? Staying awake. The lights flickered. For a moment, everything went dark. When they came back on, she was closer, standing at the edge of the counter. You drove in, she said softly. That means they've seen you. Who? She didn't answer. The bell rang again. The door was open. A man stood there, tall, thin. His clothes were outdated, something from the 70s. His skin looked pale, almost gray. You found another one, he said. The woman nodded. Daniel felt the air grow heavy, like pressure before a storm. I'm leaving, he said. The man smiled. No one leaves before morning. Daniel turned and ran. Outside, the town looked different. The buildings seemed closer. The shadows stretched across the road like fingers. He got into his car and turned the key. Nothing. Again, nothing. His phone buzzed. One bar of signal. A notification. Emergency alert. He opened it. There was no message. Just a time. 3 o'clock in the morning. He checked the clock on the dashboard. 3 o'clock in the morning. The seconds weren't moving. He stared at it. The colon didn't blink. A knock on the window made him scream. The man stood beside the car. Time stops here, he said. Daniel shook his head. This isn't real. The man leaned closer. We thought the same thing. What do you want? Nothing. We just need you to stay. Daniel's chest tightened. Why? So we can rest. The man's reflection in the glass didn't match his movements. It smiled wider. We were travelers, too. We stopped. We waited for morning. But there isn't one. The streetlights flickered. Daniel noticed the houses, the windows, shapes behind the curtains. Watching. Every night, the man whispered. The light almost comes. And every night it doesn't. They get hungry. Who? The man opened the car door. The locks clicked open by themselves. The ones who wake at dawn. The pressure in the air vanished. Somewhere in the town, something screamed. Not human. The man stepped back. Run! Daniel ran, through streets that twisted in impossible ways. He passed the diner again, the church, the gas station. The town looped. He turned corners and found himself back where he started. The screaming grew louder. Then the sky changed. At first, he thought it was sunrise. Golden light spilled over the rooftops. Hope surged. But the light wasn't warm. It was pale, sickly, like something glowing under skin. The townspeople stepped outside. They looked relieved, because the light wasn't for them. It was for him. Daniel stumbled. The light reached the edge of the street. The shapes inside it moved. Too many limbs, Too many eyes. The woman's voice carried through the air. Thank you for staying. The man stood beside her. The townspeople began to walk toward him, slowly, gratefully, because for the first time in years, they might sleep. Daniel tried to run again, but the town had already decided. And as the light touched his skin, he understood. There had never been a shortcut. The GPS hadn't led him here. Something else had. And tomorrow night, when another traveler drove down that road, the townspeople would be waiting, watching, hoping that the morning would come for someone else. The sound that comes from the hills. The sound that comes from the hills. When I was 9 years old, my dad told me never to go into the hills behind our town. He didn't say why. He didn't raise his voice or threaten me the way some parents do. He just said it quietly while we were unpacking boxes in the living room, folding clothes and stacking dishes into cabinets that still smelled like someone else's life. He said it the same way he told me not to touch the stove or run into the street. Calm, final, like it wasn't up for discussion, like it had always been a rule long before we ever lived there. The hills aren't safe, he said. That's all you need to know. I remember looking at him, waiting for more, waiting for a story or a warning, or at least the kind of explanation parents usually give when they want you to be afraid. But he just kept unpacking. He didn't even look at me again. And then he changed the subject. He asked me where I wanted my bed to go. He asked if I wanted pizza that night. He turned on the television, loud enough that the silence couldn't come back. But kids don't forget things like that, especially when adults act like something is ordinary when it clearly isn't. Especially when the hills are the first thing you see every morning. Our house sat at the very edge of Ashwood. The backyard ended in a long stretch of dead grass that sloped down toward the tree line. From my bedroom window, I could see the dark shape of the hills rising behind everything. Even higher than the church steeple, even higher than the water tower. At sunrise, the light never seemed to touch them. The rest of the town would glow soft and gold, but the hills stayed dark, as if they absorbed the morning instead of reflecting it. Sometimes, before school, I would just stand there and watch them. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Movement, maybe, or proof that they were normal. They never were. Ashwood was the kind of town that didn't feel real. It looked like someone had taken a photograph of small-town America and stretched it too far, blurring the edges. The streets were too clean, the houses too similar, the smiles too practiced. One grocery store, one gas station, one school. The same people everywhere, all the time. And always the feeling that everyone knew something you didn't. And always the hills. They rose behind everything, dark and endless, covered in trees so thick they blocked the sky. From town they looked close, almost reachable, like you could walk there in an afternoon. But when you drove toward them, they seemed to shift, sliding farther away, the roads bending and curving, as if the hills didn't want to be found. People in town never gave directions that led too close. They would pause, think, then send you somewhere else. Sometimes, when the wind was right, the trees moved in strange patterns, not like leaves in a breeze, more like something large was passing through them. I told my dad once that it looked like the hills were breathing. He told me not to say things like that. The first night in our new house, I woke up at 3:03 a.m. I didn't know the time then. I only learned it later, after it happened again and again, night after night, until my body started waking before the sound even began. At first, I thought it was thunder. But the sky was clear. The sound came from far away, a low, steady hum that pulsed in a slow rhythm. It wasn't loud, but it felt like it was inside my chest, vibrating in my ribs, crawling into my ears, like my heart had fallen out of sync. I lay there, frozen, listening. The longer I heard it, the more certain I became that it wasn't just a sound. There were layers to it. Something underneath, like voices buried in metal. I got out of bed and went to the window. The hills were darker than the rest of the night. For a moment, I thought I saw lights moving between the trees. Then they were gone. The next morning, I asked my dad what it was. He froze for just a second. It was subtle. Anyone else might have missed it. But I was watching him closely because I had been waiting all night for his answer. "Probably the mill," he said. He said it too quickly. But Ashwood didn't have a mill. I knew because I'd asked. I'd asked the neighbor. I'd asked the cashier at the grocery store. I'd even asked the mailman. Everyone gave the same confused look before changing the subject. Kids always ask about new places. They want to know everything. They want to know where the shortcuts are, where the good snacks are, which streets are safe, which ones you avoid. They want to know what happened before they got there because kids can always tell when a place has a past. Ashwood didn't have anything, at least not anything you could point to. No movie theater, no mall, no factories, no mill. No reason for the town to exist at all. It felt like a place people passed through on the way to somewhere else, except nobody ever seemed to be passing through. Everyone had always been there. Everyone had always known each other. Except the hills. Those felt like the reason. At school, I met Connor and Lila. They were the first kids who didn't stare at me like I was a stranger, the first ones who didn't ask the same tired questions about where I came from and why we moved. Connor had messy dark hair and a nervous energy like he was always waiting for something bad to happen. He chewed the inside of his cheek when he was thinking and jumped whenever the bell rang. Lila was quiet, but when she talked, people listened. She had that kind of presence, the kind that made teachers lower their voices and other kids stop mid-sentence. The first time I mentioned the sound, they both stopped. Not just paused, stopped. Forks halfway to their mouths, eyes locked on me. "You hear it too?" Lila asked. "Every night," I said. Connor leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Does it wake you up?" "Yes." "Same time?" I hesitated. "I think so." He nodded. 3:03. The number felt wrong, like it had always been waiting for me. Connor looked around the cafeteria before lowering his voice even more. Do your parents tell you not to talk about it? I nodded. That's when they told me about the rules. Rule 1. Don't go into the hills. Rule 2. Don't ask about the sound. Rule 3. If someone disappears, don't look for them. People disappear? I asked. Connor shrugged. Sometimes. He said it like it was weather, like rain, like something you couldn't stop, so there was no point worrying. The first person I knew who disappeared was Lila's older brother. His name was Marcus. He was 16 and tall, and the kind of person who always smiled at younger kids, the kind who stayed late after practice to help the middle schoolers. He used to walk Lila home every day, even when it made him late. One afternoon, he went hiking with friends. Only one of them came back. The boy said Marcus had slipped, fallen, but nobody searched the hills. Not really. They walked the edges, called his name, wrote reports, set up temporary lights like it was all for show. But nobody crossed the tree line, not the police, not the volunteers, not even the dogs. I asked my dad why. He said it was too dangerous. After a week, they stopped. After a month, people stopped saying his name. After a year, it was like he had never existed at all. But the sound got louder. It changed. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It pulsed, like a heartbeat, like breathing. Some nights, it felt close enough to touch. That summer, Connor said we should go look. I said no. He said everyone said no at first. But curiosity doesn't fade. It grows. It settles into your chest and waits. The night we went, the sky was purple and heavy, like a storm was coming but never arrived. The air felt thick, electric, like the moment before lightning. We told our parents we were staying at each other's houses. We packed flashlights and snacks and rode our bikes to the playground, our tires crunching on gravel too loudly in the quiet. The entrance to the hills wasn't marked. No fence, no sign, just a gap in the trees. The moment we stepped through, the air changed. The town noise disappeared. The sound grew louder, layered, not just mechanical. Voices, buried under metal, whispers you could almost understand if you listened long enough. We followed the trail for hours. At some point, Connor stopped. Do you see this? The ground beneath us wasn't dirt. It was pavement. Cracked and broken and covered in moss, but unmistakable. There used to be a road here, Lila whispered. To what? I asked. She didn't answer. We kept walking. Eventually, we saw lights. A building sat in a clearing. Concrete, no windows, too large for a town this small. The sound came from inside. Connor pushed the door. It opened. The smell was overwhelming. Rot, chemicals, something sweet and rotten underneath it all. The lights were on, fluorescent, buzzing. The hallway stretched farther than it should have, the ceiling too low, the walls too smooth, like they had been built without corners. And then we heard footsteps. Slow, measured, like someone who already knew we were there. Lila grabbed my arm. We need to leave. But Connor was already moving. At the end of the hall, there was a door. The sound was deafening. He opened it. Rows of beds, machines, tubes, people. Some were children, some were old. All connected, all breathing in rhythm with the sound. And on one of the beds, Marcus. His eyes opened. He looked at Lila. And he screamed. That's when the lights went out. The sound stopped. For just 1 second. The silence was worse. Then it came back. Louder, hungrier. Behind us, a voice spoke. You weren't supposed to see this. We turned. Our parents stood there. Not angry, not afraid, just tired. My father stepped forward. This place keeps Ashwood alive. How? I asked. He gestured to the beds. The hills don't let us leave. They never have. Long ago, people tried. The town starved, crops failed, children died. So we made a deal. With what? Connor asked. My father smiled. The thing in the hills. The sound pulsed. They feed on time, years, lifetimes. They take it slowly so the body survives. That's why the sound keeps you awake. It's already touching you. I looked at Marcus. He looked younger, like he had been when he was 12. They rewind us, my father said, so we can keep giving. Lila shook her head. This is insane. My father's voice softened. You'll understand. Connor whispered. We won't stay. The doors locked. The sound grew louder. And for the first time, I realized something worse than the truth. The beds weren't full. They were waiting. For us. Because Ashwood always needs more time. And one day, when we are parents, we will stand in that hallway too. And tell our children not to go into the hills. The Wakefulness Trial. In 1987, my grandmother gave me a sealed envelope and told me not to open it until she died. She didn't explain why. She didn't have to. My grandmother was not the kind of woman who made jokes or dramatic gestures. She lived her life in quiet, practical ways. She cooked, she gardened, she read the same newspaper every morning and circled the crossword clues she didn't know. She believed in routines, in predictability, in the idea that if you did the same small things every day, the world would stay stable. But that day, she was shaking. Not violently, just enough that the teacup in her hands rattled against the saucer. I remember the sound more than anything else. A soft, uneven tapping that filled the kitchen. She kept glancing at the windows, at the door, as if she expected someone to come in. Promise me, she said. Her voice was tight, like she was holding something back. Promise me you won't open it until I'm gone. I promised. She studied my face for a long time, as if she was trying to memorize it. Then she nodded once, satisfied, and the moment passed. She asked if I wanted more tea. She asked about school. By evening, it was as if the conversation had never happened. But I remembered. She lived another 23 years, long enough that sometimes I forgot about the envelope entirely. Life moved, I grew up, left home, built a career. But every now and then, I would see her watching me in a way that made me uncomfortable, as if she were measuring time. When she died, the house felt too quiet. We cleaned for days. My parents handled most of it, sorting through clothes and dishes and things that seemed suddenly meaningless. I stayed out of the way until the last afternoon, when my mother asked me to empty the freezer. That's when I found it. The envelope was in the back, hidden behind bags of frozen vegetables and wrapped in wax paper like something fragile. The paper had yellowed, the edges curling as if it had been opened and sealed many times. But the seal itself was still intact. My name was written in careful, precise handwriting that had not changed in decades. For a long time, I just stood there. The freezer hummed behind me, the sound loud in the quiet house. I remember the cold air spilling over my hands, the way it made my fingers ache. But I didn't move. I had the strange, unsettling feeling that if I opened it too quickly, something would happen. That this moment mattered in a way I didn't yet understand. I had the even stranger feeling that she had been waiting for this moment, that she had known exactly when I would find it, that she had planned it. Inside was a key, heavy, old, the kind used for industrial locks, not houses or apartments, and a single note. Storage Unit 19. No address, no explanation, no signature, nothing else. I turned the key over in my hand again and again, as if the answers might be engraved somewhere I couldn't yet see. I should have thrown it away. I should have told my parents and let them decide what to do. I should have gone back to my life and let the past stay buried. But the longer I held the key, the more certain I became that the envelope had not been a warning. It had been an invitation, and invitations imply choice. Instead, I spent 3 weeks searching. I started with public records, then storage registries, then outdated business directories. I drove to places that no longer existed, talked to people who barely remembered her name, followed paper trails that ended in nothing. The more dead ends I found, the more determined I became. When I finally located the facility, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a mistake. The storage complex was 3 hours outside the city, past fields that had long since gone to weeds and barns that leaned as if they were exhausted. The road leading to it was barely paved. My GPS lost signal miles before I arrived. The buildings were rusted and empty, except for a single office trailer. The windows were dusty. The sign out front had faded so badly I could barely read the name. The man inside looked at the key and didn't ask questions. He only stared at it for a long time. Then at me. "Your grandmother paid for this in cash," he said, "every year, always on time." There was something in his voice I didn't like. Not fear. Respect. He led me to the far edge of the property. The farther we walked, the quieter it became. The wind seemed to stop. Even the sound of our footsteps felt muted. Unit 19 was separated from the others by a chain-link fence. There were no security cameras, no nearby lights, no neighboring units. It stood alone, as if distance itself were part of the security. The door was heavy, reinforced. Scratches ran along the metal, deep and uneven, like someone had tried to open it without a key. "Has anyone else ever?" I began. The man shook his head. "Not my business," he said. When I opened it, the smell hit me first. Cold metal. Chemicals. Something sour and old, like a hospital room that had been sealed too long. The air inside was colder than outside. Inside was a desk, a tape recorder, and 6 boxes labeled with dates. Dust covered everything except the chair, as if someone had used it recently. I sat down. The first tape was already in the machine. When I pressed play, my grandmother's voice filled the room. "If you are hearing this, I am gone," she said. "And you have chosen not to forget." There was a long pause. "I was a nurse," she continued, "but not the kind who worked in hospitals. I worked in places that were not meant to exist." The recording crackled. "In 1959, I was assigned to a research facility in the northern region. It had no official name. We called it Site K." She described the place in detail. Concrete buildings buried under snow, long corridors carved into the earth, windows that looked out onto nothing but white, guards who never spoke, who never removed their gloves, who never met anyone's eyes, scientists who did not sleep and whose hands trembled from too much coffee and something else. She said the cold there was different. It did not bite or burn. It settled inside you, slow and patient, as if it wanted to stay. The experiment was simple, at least at first. 5 volunteers, a new stimulant gas. 30 days without sleep. They were criminals, my grandmother said. That is what we were told. Dangerous men. But they did not seem dangerous when they arrived. They were frightened. They asked questions. One of them kept praying. Another asked if he could write letters to his family. The first 5 days were uneventful. The men spoke, laughed, played cards. They told stories about their lives before prison. They made jokes about the researchers watching them. The 6th day, they stopped smiling. They still spoke, but less. Their voices became sharp, suspicious. They began accusing each other of things that had not happened. The 9th day, one began screaming. He screamed for 3 hours straight before his vocal cords ruptured. Even after that, he kept opening his mouth, forcing soundless cries into the chamber. The others said nothing. They moved away from him. They watched. By day 12, they had stopped talking to each other entirely. They whispered to the microphones. They spoke to something, my grandmother said. Not to us, to something they believed was listening. They described shapes in the dark corners of the room, figures standing just beyond sight, faces that appeared when they closed their eyes. Day 15. They began removing the observation cameras, not by breaking them, by covering them with skin. There was a long silence on the tape. They did not sleep, she whispered. But they were not awake either. Their eyes were open. Their bodies moved. But something else was in control. I stopped the tape. The storage unit was silent. Too silent. I had the sudden, irrational feeling that someone else was listening. The second tape was worse. Her breathing was uneven as she spoke. She described the moment they opened the chamber. The gas had run out. The men had begged for more. They had scratched messages into the walls with their fingernails. Keep it on. Do not let us sleep. Inside, the room was covered in blood, flesh. One of the men had died. The others had eaten him. But they were not starving. They were afraid. They begged the researchers not to make them sleep. Because when we sleep, one had said, they come closer. He had tried to claw his own eyes out. The third tape ended abruptly. The fourth began with my grandmother crying. They approved the next phase, she said. They said the first trial was a success. There was a second experiment. This time, they used soldiers. Men who had volunteered. Men who believed in the project. This time, they increased the dosage. This time, the gas did not just prevent sleep. It prevented dreaming. They believed dreams were the key, my grandmother said. They believed the mind needed them to stay human. Without dreams, the boundary breaks. The soldiers lasted longer. But when they broke completely. One began speaking in languages no one recognized. Another stopped responding to any stimuli. But his eyes followed things that were not there. The fifth tape contained something else, not her voice. Breathing, slow, wet, followed by a whisper. We are still awake. I ejected the tape. My hands were shaking. There was one box left. Inside it was not tapes. It was documents, photos, images of patients whose eyes were open too wide, rooms filled with machines, charts tracking time without sleep, and a vial. The label read, Trial 7, Subject 3. The fluid inside moved, as if something were alive, as if it were breathing. Behind me, the tape recorder clicked. I hadn't touched it. My grandmother's voice returned. You should not have come. Then something else spoke, a voice layered over hers. We have been waiting. The door of the storage unit slammed shut. And for the first time in my life, I realized something far worse than the experiment. It had never ended.